Hello, and welcome to this week's installment of Character Building. Today's subject is goals. It's a pretty broad subject, and one we could probably spend a lot more time than on this one video talking about. But I think it's one of the more important ones, given that your goal is the reason why you're drawing, and the reason why you're not filling a blank you're filling a blank space with marks. And also B, what your goals are determine how you prioritize problem solving in your work. And drawing is pretty much all about problem solving something. Whether it's a character design or it's a illustration or whatever you're trying to get at. If you don't have a clear goal in mind, you're going to start to wander. So this is going to be like we may come back to the subject in the future, but this is what we're aiming for in this video. So in general, I've noticed there are two broad kinds of goals when working. Goals that prioritize observation and goals that prioritize opinion. But what's interesting, though, is that even though the priorities shift depending on what you're doing, the other element is never absent. So while a life drawing may be centered primarily on observation, it's still requiring having an opinion to serve it. How much does that arm push out away from the body? How far along the line does the apex of that curve land? They're all quick opinions, but opinions that are aimed at being accurate without obsessing over precision. And those are two different things. And it is possible, certainly, to obsess over precision to the point where it becomes self-defeating. If you're so nervous about getting something right and agonizing over it, it kind of blocks you from putting any marks down. And that's kind of that's just not going to work. So, but let's move on. So, meanwhile, so you'll have the goals that prioritize the observation end of it. But for the goals that prioritize opinion, such as things like imaginative drawing, style choices, caricature, just to name a few things, for example, still need to rest on an understanding of anatomy gained from observation. Beyond that, we've all seen, like we've been seeing in this series already, we've been using references from real life. Whether it's a kind of emotion that exists in real life, and we use that as an outside source of inspiration, but also actually real pictures, right, of pictures of objects we've transformed for the purposes of creating characters. But in all these cases, the references and observation is ultimately made to serve what our opinion is, and we have to have that going in somewhere. So today what I'd like to do is demonstrate this by doing two different examples. One where I draw a hand from reference to learn more about hands, and the other where I do a caricature, which is the opinion-based one. And I'll try to supply the difference in my thought process as we go through them both. So let's get started. Here we go. Okay, so here we have a picture of my hand, which I deliberately tried to put in a somewhat challenging position, just for the purpose of demonstration. I want to make sure that get the idea that this is not just for a standard or generic kind of hand position. So actually, it kind of looks like I've done a Spider-Man thing there. But so anyway, I'm starting here with the sweeping of the forces through the arm, which from this position kind of sweeps up from the inside of the arm into the outside of the palm. Because my arm is palm side up in this position, so I'm trying to get a hold of the mass of the palm right here. It's that thickness to the palm that I'm trying to get a hold of. Trying to get the angle of the curve that wraps around the meaty part of the thumb there. You can see I'm blocking out the overall shape of the four fingers there. Trying to look abstractly at it. So I see the shape of the thumb protruding out there with the forceful shape. A lot of this will get refined in time, so I'll get more precise. But in the beginning there, as you can see, I've just laid out the basics. Just trying to figure out how this thing is working through line and force, and also through abstract shape and measurement. But all that opinion again is directed at trying to recreate it as it is. If something sticks out a little bit more, I'm not trying to let that opinion, show itself more than can be justified, by the marks I'm making. As you can see, as you work from, as I've already worked from the more broad shape, as my workspace gets a little bit narrower and more focused the longer I work on it. And that's kind of what you'd expect to see. I know I've made a big deal of talking about hierarchy. It comes into play in so many different ways, and this is even when you're drawing realism, or when we're talking about observation as the top of your pyramid of your hierarchy, or whether you're doing opinion, which we'll get into in a minute. Constantly going back and comparing so that, it doesn't matter if I make a mistake the first few times. I can always go back and change it up as I need as I need it. I think right there I was thinking about the negative space. This is all kind of getting a little dark right now, so it's worth noting that you can, fix this. I try not to use the eraser as much as possible. I'd rather get it, before then. But if I have done my job in the beginning of getting it close in terms of laying out the overall features, then I won't have to fix it that much or erase that much. I give myself that freedom to make a mistake. It's all about whatever I correct, it should be getting a little bit more close to the reality. My opinion should be getting more refined every time. But my opinion about what I'm seeing should get closer to the actual thing. And that really is kind of what it's about. It is about getting closer and getting closer to what your goal is every time. So with every line, every stroke, the first stroke probably won't be your correct one. It might get somewhere in the ballpark, but, that's good enough. Ballpark is pretty good. And so you give yourself that leeway. And you fix things as they come along. And the more you do that, the more you realize, oh, this is how this structure really is. This is how the structure works. You see here, I'm going back in here and I'm refining I'm drawing in some lines that define the turning edge for me. That's going to further define and inform my brain of the solidity of this hand. So, moving right along to the caricature portion of this video. Here we have a sample of an old-time mugshot of I think they're Australian criminals from the early 1900s, I think. Late 1800s? Yeah, 1900s, I think. And so, on the right here, you see my list of opinions. I've already written them down. So he's got a long V-shaped, head, which I've already kind of capitalized on there in my initial shape ideas. He has a wide brim compared to his head. He's got his hat is wider certainly than. My impression was his hat is wider than significantly than his face and his head, so I might want to capitalize on that. Even though a literal interpretation of that drawing, a realistic one would kind of not do that. So. And lastly, I wrote down here, he has large eye sockets and kind of beady eyes in comparison to the size of the sockets. Certainly very sunken looking appearance. So already I blocked out the shapes I'm most interested in here. And from the get-go, you see I'm pushing the shape of the hat more, and I may even do that more just because it's something that struck me as a good place to dig up contrast and interest. Even though, like I said, it doesn't really represent an accurate depiction of the guy. It's more of an in spirit kind of thing. I feel like this is right as opposed to this is the way it is, right? And yet, even in working the hat, and I'll probably end up repeating this a few times, but even in the hat itself, I'm still keeping the overall push-out shape that it makes, at least how I see it. So that's still consistent, even if the proportion is much further off. So So here you can see me playing around with something I really like to find whenever I'm doing a face that's real or caricatured. I like to find this. It's almost like a diamond shaped plane that defines the side of the jaw. Right, if the head is turned, it's kind of outlined by the cheekbone, where the location of the cheekbone is, and the outside of the cheekbone to the corner of the jaw, and then down like almost like a kite. Really, it drops down to the chin, to the side of the chin. And it's a really great shape to help find the dimension in a head shape, even when you're caricaturing it like this. So in that cheek shape, if you may notice, I've taken note of the fact that the cheekbone is slightly higher in elevation than the jawbone, the back where it meets the ear. Just below that. So I've tried to maintain that, and yet still stretch out that shape, because I wanted the longness of the face to be represented in the V shape. So you have the V shape of the overall head, which is one of my goals, right? It's still there, but I pushed that. Excuse me. I've maintained the truth of the character itself, which is the observation part, in maintaining that kite shape on the cheek, on the side of the face. Those were kind of my thoughts on where I was going with that. So yeah, the kite shape is maintained, although it's stretched. The opinion has been pushed, but it's a truthful opinion. It's a weird thing to say. You're stretching the truth, but it's almost more true in many ways than a literal interpretation is, right? Because we can still recognize the person almost even more readily in that respect, because we see certain aspects of that person that are true inside a caricature. So focusing on the shape of that brow there. And the eye isn't really that small as I'm drawing it compared to the arch of the eye socket you can see there. I've actually went ahead and really pushed that smallness of the eye. But the shape that is going between the top of the eye socket there, which is formed by the eyebrow, and the eye itself is consistent. It's just exaggerated. So what holds it together, where the truth is, where the observation is, and is in the shape, is in maintaining the shape, while here it's the exaggeration is in the proportion. The eye gets smaller and the space around it gets bigger. Really emphasizing the beadiness of those eyes, right? The pupils are really tiny in there. Almost giving a very creepy look. So, hollowed out skull, really, of a guy. I must say that these pictures of the gangsters or the criminals from the early 20s, if you look them up on Pinterest especially, there's something else, man. I tell you, those guys, great caricature material, and just to practice. They all had really interesting faces, distinctive characteristics. And for whatever reason, especially in Australia, if you were a criminal and they got you, they let you pretty much pose in a really, kick butt way. I mean, they made you look really, really intimidating for the camera. So I don't know what was behind that, but it sure makes some interesting pictures and very interesting caricatures. Here's going back to the hat for a second, since as you can see, I'm drawing that area again. The reason why I pushed it so much the way I did is because my impression was that the brim on the near side of the head pushed out more so on the other side, and that's like an asymmetry I really wanted to take advantage of. And if I haven't mentioned it before, there's breaking it down to making sure you get asymmetry. If you can break something down into a big, medium, and a small size, it's better than just dividing it up by even thirds. So, and that's what I did here. I made the head almost kind of like the large, the brim on the left, the medium, and the brim on the right, small. I could even probably have taken it further than that. And if I had done this a second pass, I might have done just that. So, and there we have it. So what did we learn today, basically? That there are two kinds of goals in general, and they each have their role to play. One mostly in, drawing to learn, and the other one is really having your own opinion and then using your knowledge that you've gained either through previous drawings or just other reference material that you've gathered together that exists in real life, and using that and making it subservient to the opinion, which ends up then being a truthful opinion, even if it isn't something that's totally real, but it still has that ring of truth to it because you're still using the real stuff, even if it's in a subordinate role to the stuff you're trying to make out of your imagination. So there you have it. I will see you guys next week. Have a good one. If you like this video and want to see more, click subscribe. Want to tell me what to draw? You can. Click on the link to my Patreon page.